It is 7 o'clock on the dot. I do not guarantee that you'll get out of here at 8 on the dot, but we're definitely going to start at 7. My one and only job tonight is to thank you all for being here and to introduce our very talented MC. Our MC is an 8th grader and one of the founding members of the BSU. And so everyone, please welcome Kiki to my
Tonight is about celebrating the power of student voices and learning from a truly exceptional leader, someone we are proud to call a York alum. On behalf of York's Black Student Union, we are thrilled to welcome Mr. Ben Jealous for tonight's meaningful conversation. We, York's BSU, have asked Mr. Jealous to come support our organization by sharing his experience with us as a York alumni and compare it to the experience at York currently. Before we begin, I wanted to honor our founders of York's BSU. York's Black Student Union is about creating a space for Black students to have the ability to cultivate a space where we can come together and have a space to talk about issues that get swept under the rug because of the fear of rejection. Our BSU was founded by Zaina Diallo and taken 3 years to get through to create it. In just a moment, you will hear a dialogue between a group of York students and our honored guest, Mr. Jealous, a nationally recognized civil rights leader, former president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and now serving as the executive director of the Sierra Club. Our nation's largest grassroots environmental organizations, we are deeply grateful to have him with us this evening. To begin our program, it's my pleasure to share the following message. Oh, sorry guys. So Mr. Keith couldn't make it tonight. He's not feeling well, so he decided to send us a video on what he would like to say in his high school.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person this evening. I unfortunately contracted COVID, but still wanted to say a few words. Welcome to this celebration of community. Tonight, we come together as a school family, united by our shared commitment to learning, listening, and lifting each other up. I'm thrilled to welcome back to campus Ben Jealous, a York alum, who means so much to our school. Through Ben's words, we have an opportunity to see one another, hear one another, and celebrate the unique stories, talents, and perspectives that make us who we are. In a world that often focuses on what divides us, tonight we embrace what connects us, our shared humanity, our resilience, and our drive to create a better world. But none of this would be possible without the dedication and hard work of the young leaders of our Black Student Union. To our high school students who have organized this event, I want to take a moment to say thank you. Dialogue and celebration that has brought us all together tonight. In planning and executing this event, you have demonstrated not just leadership, but also empathy, collaboration, and the power of a unified voice. Thank you all for being here, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
A conversation with some of York's own inspiring students alongside a very special guest. Please join me in welcoming our panelists, Asia Wilson, Ava Hoffmeister, and Zaina Diallo.
So, as a BSU, we read the Nelson's book, Our People Were Always Free. And one of my first questions is, your book speaks to how history shapes our identities. What's one lesson you wish every high school student on the peninsula understood about our shared past?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm going to encourage us to put our mics up, because some folks know who are hard of hearing, so just put them up one more step. I learned how to use a mic from Dave Chappelle when we were 18. Which is useful, because I was an organizer in Harlem, screaming at the top of my lungs with no mic. You know, I think it's important on this peninsula. First, it's just great to see so many old friends and so many neighbors, and so proud to be back in York. I'm a proud York dork. A couple of my fellow York dorks. This is Michael Parrish, who's the COO of the Sierra Club. Michael's class of 1990 as well. We co-founded the first high school chapter of the Student Environmental Action Coalition here, so it's a nice full circle for us as solidly middle-aged men to be running the Sierra Club together. And then Ian Martin of the fabulous white hair in the back of the room also. And a photography teacher here, and a man of great empathy and skill, National Geographic Award winner, all those things. He flies up to the Arctic with me most years to shoot photography for the Sierra Club. As I tell the students today, one of the things of being a York dork is that your stock keeps rising throughout your life. We're a totally nerdy school, and the fellow nerds in the room. The great things about the journey through life as a nerd is that high school is usually not your peak. So, I'll just put it that way. And I think that's an important thing for every high school student to understand, is that this really is just the beginning of your journey, of your leadership. I'm so proud of these students, of all the students who started the Black Student Union here. And they have a story to tell, and I hope everybody in this room, when they tell it, will hear it. Black student unions are always started for the same reason. I'll just put it that way. And those reasons exist here at York. And that makes me sad. I feel like York has gone backwards in important ways, not forwards. But what I've learned leading institutions often in crisis and turning them around is that things move in both directions. And I'm really proud of the faculty here, really grateful for the faculty who are still here. Steve, I saw earlier, June is here. People who are big, encouraged me as the slowest man on the running team. Steve did, well, June still looks like she was 12. We were amazed that she was a teacher. But you guys really do, you're kind of the last flames of an old tradition of making this school a safe place for everybody. I was telling the students when I was here, we had, 1980s weren't safe for a lot of kids. But one of my best friends was out in gay in the 9th grade and showed up in green spandex pretty much every day. And New York was a safe place. Like Eric Olson, a very successful doctor, and another student thought he was a dinosaur, and it was safe for him too. Sure remembers who that is. Again, all these folks have gone on to be very successful. And so I really want to thank you for seeking to bring York back to the best of its tradition, which is to be a safe place for nerdy kids.
What do you think, how was your, so you, of course, you were the leader of the NAACP, and now you're of the Sierra Club. How was your, how are those two different roles, how have they affected you?
It's a great privilege for me. I grew up in both organizations out here. I have, I think, a child's view of both of them. NAACP taught me, frankly, the value of leading an army of black women. About 85% of leaders in the NAACP, we have 25,000 volunteer leaders across this country. And about 85% of them, certainly 85% of the ones who are worth anything, are women. and they get things done. You know, the Sierra Club, we have a ratio of 1 staff person to every 10 volunteer leaders. At the NAACP was 1 to 250. And there was a combination of a lot of black men who were vets and pastors and very serious leaders and very good at organizing large numbers of people. And very courageous women who were good at the same, but who were also willing to follow at the same time. Willing to lead and to follow. When men fall down, we're usually comfortable leading, not so comfortable with following. And the women in the NAACP showed the power to them both. And they are on the front lines everywhere. My first week at work, we had kids who were chained to a bench in Louisiana in 100-degree heat. And what that principal wasn't prepared for was an army of black grandmothers coming to their rescue. And that was the privilege leading NAACP. The Sierra Club, you know, our real power is we also are kind of everywhere. And 2,400 communities around the country, like the NAACP, we're in 600 communities, which means we're in every corner of every state. And we have two types of people in the Sierra Club. One are very impassioned, very knowledgeable advocates about everything environmental. Why is your power bill suddenly so much higher? Because, you know, your power company might be over-dependent on coal, and they understand all of that. To, you know, how do you save a particular type of tree in a time of extreme climate? But the other half of the Sierra Club, literally half of our groups, all they do is outings. Are people who are just on fire to get their neighbors outside every week. And the two things really converge. Here, the Sierra Club chapter was founded by Ansel Adams. And he was alive until I was 11. And Ansel Adams made him the greatest wildland photographer ever, certainly the best known. And what Ansel represented was what John Muir really founded the Sierra Club based on, which was the most powerful thing you can do in the outdoors is not to get somebody outside to clear their lungs, it's to get them outside to transform their soul. To get in the most beautiful parts of the outdoors, and they'll never be the same again. And a real understanding that nature preaches for itself. And the simple fact is, at this point, you know, I was led back to the Sierra Club by Lou Gossett Jr. He was one of the first black men to win, maybe been the first to win an Oscar. And we were at the Image Awards, the NAACP's annual awards, because, you know, Oscars are often so money. So we still have a need for that party that Aretha Franklin started. And Lou and I were a little drunk at the end of the night, and Lou said to me, Ben, you know, I've been in this racial justice fight my whole life. He's like, you know, sometimes I feel like we're fighting over who's in first class, and what we need to do is look out the window. Because the plane has dropped 25,000 feet in the last 2 minutes. And maybe if we looked out the window, we would realize that whoever's flying it is drunk, asleep, or dead. Right? And then, you know, we would be more focused on getting the smartest person back in the cockpit so we could get back to elevation. I said, Lou, that's beautiful, brother. What the hell are you talking about? And he said, the Earth, man, the Earth is dying. It doesn't matter who's in first place on the dead planet. And so now, the reality is that the human rights struggle very much includes the environmental movement because we must save our collective home. And we must do it in a way that's equitable. And we must recognize that it will be the people of the global south who will pay the steepest price the fastest, and they have the least to do with this problem. And of course, that's what Donald Trump's whole militarization of our border is all about, is his unwillingness to recognize what the great Republican leader Frederick Douglass said in his tirade against the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is, if your family is, just to paraphrase, go read it, it's called Our Composite Nation. It's a brilliant speech. And he was talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act here in California, and it was his tirade against the Chinese Exclusion Act. And Frederick Douglass essentially says, if what was happening to their family was happening to your family, you do the same damn thing. So, like, what are you complaining about? And the reality is that right now, the civil rights movement, the human rights movement, the environmental movement, on most days are very much more deeply connected, we realize. Mel Mason, the great leader of the NAACP here historically, is over at a meeting right now with undocumented folks who are terrified. And it's really important for us to put arms around each other as a human family. As kids are insisting that York does, and Mel Mason is insisting that we do with the undocumented folks in Monterey County as well.
Okay, so here at York, and some English. In your work, how have you seen language shape movements or even holding back?
Yeah, you know, the environmental movement is held back by people who speak at like a university level. I've often complained about that since I was a young environmentalist. Increasingly, the civil rights movement is as well. Just real talk, I don't know a black person who calls himself BIPOC. I don't know a Latino who calls himself Latinx. And the important thing, you know, as I think I'm the only Rhodes Scholar Monterey County ever produced, is you're going to learn a lot in university, and your vocabulary will continue to expand. And when I got to university, you had words like hegemony. And when I got back here, the brilliant former headmaster of York, Dr. Littlefield, said to me, as I walked into the library, he said, whatever sense of humor you think you picked up in New York City, drop it. You're going to hurt a lot of people's feelings out here. But what I learned walking down the hill to kind of deeper into Harlem from Columbia was whatever words I learned up the hill, like drop them from the campus gate. I've spent most of my life learning, that's how I say this, most of my life as an organizer, reminding myself every day that the smartest thing I can do is speak in third grade English. Because first of all, everybody in the room will understand you. Secondly, if somebody has ADHD, the ADHD folks with master's degrees like me, they'll understand you better too. It's easier to track somebody talking in third grade language. And instead that you've got to learn from your opponents, Donald Trump has reminded us of that. He speaks in third grade language, and it makes it much easier for people to understand and to follow him. And so universities should teach you how to analyze the world and how to fix the world. But you learned everything you needed to know about how to communicate with people by the second grade.
Okay, as someone who is navigating multiple identities such as being an activist, being an educator, being a father, how has your faith and just your beliefs in general shaped the way that you are a leader in this space?
I love that question. And what I would say is this. One, America's a very religious country. There are myriad faith traditions here. Religious freedom is at the core of who we are. Those of us who are more progressive, if we go back and we're humble enough to read the speeches of the leaders who inspired us, literally from like Teddy Roosevelt to Shirley Chisholm, you'll find in those speeches that they will speak at least three of the following four vocabularies. The vocabulary of faith, the vocabulary of love, the vocabulary of patriotism, and the vocabulary of the American dream, the aspiration that the next generation will do better than you and your family. And when Dr. King was assassinated, progressives stopped speaking the language of faith publicly. When Vietnam ravaged our souls, we increasingly stopped speaking the language of patriotism after that. When the greed scandals of the 1980s and savings alone, all the way through whatever the heck happened, with crypto last week, we stopped speaking the language of aspiration. We had a hard time to confront, just feeling comfortable. And that leaves us only with the language of love. And yet, when you want to lead the American people, you must be willing to be authentic. And so if you're a person of faith, please always speak from that place. As a Jewish friend said to me once, Dr. King never minimized me by speaking as a Christian, rather he affirmed me as a fellow person of faith. If aspiration is which is so thorough to every American, is part of what motivates you, speak in those terms. And not just as a union member, but as a small business person. If patriotism motivates you, speak in those terms. And then to people, it's easier for them to hear the love because it's surrounded by other languages that speak to them. And if you don't know how to do that, go watch Fox News. They pull people away from the Democratic Party. They're now the most popular news channel in America because they speak all those languages. And understand that the right wing has learned from the left. Stacey Abrams, when we were 20, and we were at a labor training camp, we were all each given a book by Byron Rustin. Byron Rustin was the out-gay Quaker organizer of the March on Washington. And a book called Down the Line. And the AFL-CIO had, I mean, they could fill up this, probably half this room with his books, that they were just trying to give away for free. I went back to buy that book for my son. It was $1,300 on eBay. I waited a month, it was $400. And it went back to $1,200. And so I started Googling, why is this book so expensive? It used to be free. Dick Armey, one of the founders of the Tea Party movement, made it required reading for the conservative movement. I teach students Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, who died out here in 1972. That is taught most frequently these days upon right-wing campuses. And so I think the hardest journey as a progressive, as a person of faith, has been to just not hide my faith or my belief in God, and to understand that if you speak as a person of faith in the right way, you actually pull other people to our movement and to you as a leader. The last thing I'd say is this, which is, there's really kind of two things that I think are most important as a person of faith. One is to remember the only prayer you really ever have to say is thank you. If you can't remember anything else, just say thank you, just be humble, and be grateful. And the other is to never forget the definition of faith in the Bible, even if you're not part of the Abrahamic tradition. It's so useful. It says faith is the essence of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And you guys, I mean, that's, it's 3 years to set up your Black Student Union, right? You kept the faith. You had every reason to give up every year, but you never gave up. And that's what it means to practice faith. And that's the heart of being a leader.
Okay, so this is coming from someone who also has ADHD.
Yeah.
How did you it's hard, let me tell you, everyone doesn't. How did you come up with all these skills? Like, you're so successful, and that's actually really hopeful for someone like you got ADHD. How did you persevere through all the struggles that, ADHD gives us? And how did you keep going?
Well, one of them, so I became an executive very young. I became an executive young because my dad was like, bro, you're going to need a secretary. And just to help keep you organized. And my grandfather, who had been a secretary, was like, yeah, I'm not going to teach you how to type until you're a CEO, because you're going to be some other man's secretary if I do. And so you're a real leader. And ADHD favors leaders because you have very quick processing speed to figure out alternatives for solving a problem. ADHD also holds leaders back because every Monday you'll have 27 new ideas for the weekend and you're starting out. And so the best thing that you can do when you have ADHD is to recognize that it's the introverts who actually get the work done. My best friends in high school, 2 of them are here, 2 of them are dead, 2 of them are here. And one of them, Michael Parrish, is the COO of the Sierra Club. COO is a very classic introvert job. CEO is a very classic extrovert job. People can do either one, but you're much better off having an introvert as your COO. You can have an introvert as a CEO. They're often more trusted because they talk less. But you would never want someone with ADHD as your COO because stuff will just never get done. And so what I learned early on, when I was actually the COO for a CEO who was an introvert, was that we were very effective because we had one extrovert and one introvert. We had one person with ADHD and we had one person with a very long attention span, and that was like magic. And so I would say to you, you're also an extrovert with ADHD, as a fellow one, make friends with introverts. And be humble enough to recognize that your success is really going to depend on your ability to surround yourself with people who are willing to stay focused on getting that idea done. Does that make sense?
So jumping off of the topic of faith, like Cindy was asking about, there comes healing and forgiving. So do you believe that healing from environmental degradation and racism is possible in our lifetime?
I learned right here at York. York had a lot of nerds, like different types of nerds. We had black nerds, we had dinosaur nerds, we had all kinds of nerds. We also had kids who were like, they were nerds from like literally like, family that was like an Oklahoma Dust Bowl family. Very conservative family, kind of skeptical about higher education, and they just devoured books. They really needed to be around other nerds and not hanging out with their Hell's Angel uncle on the weekend cooking method. One kid in particular. And we had kids who were like army brat nerds. One of them was a guy named Kyle Hoffman, who there's an award here named for. He's the first or second Naval Academy grad killed in the war in Iraq. And we had a lot of time to listen to each other here because there weren't many kids here. And you learned that what was most important was what you had in common. The healing starts with listening. I was over listening in Ireland, work they're doing to heal forests there. But racial healing starts with listening too. I had kind of a miracle happen to me down on Cannery Row. I was at a conference, and when you're older, you'll understand this predicament. The food was very late, and the drink started very early. And so I was a little bit more candid than I expected to be. And there was a couple sitting next to me, and they were the most fascinating couple at the table because they were a May-December romance, but she looked 15 years older than him. And my grandmother, who worked for Planned Parenthood in the 1940s, had her one mistake, was she had not married a man 15 years her junior, because we die younger and it's not fair. And so I wanted to know this couple who apparently had gotten it right according to my grandma. So I'm like, where are y'all from? He's like, we're from Los Gatos. And I was like, bro, that was like an orchard when I was a kid. Where are y'all really from? And he's like, well, I'm from Minnesota, my wife's from Virginia. And I said, where in Virginia? And she called me and says, Petersburg. And I said, my family's from Petersburg. We were enslaved around Petersburg for hundreds of years. And I said, what's your wife's family name? You know anybody from Virginia, like a lot of parts of the South. Southern Virginia is very poor. History is like last week, Civil War, the Revolution, and everybody knows their whole kind of family tree, especially the white folks. And so he gets ready to list off about 12 names, but he starts with her maiden name is Bland. I said, Bland? I said, yes. Kind of looks at me and asks, wait, what's your wife's name? He said, Maggie Bland. I said, oh, my grandma's Mamie Bland. He's from Minnesota, so people in Minnesota are not prepared for what comes next. And so he kind of looks at me like, I said, yeah, that's right, I'm pretty sure your wife's family is still my mom's family. I'm darker than my black grandmother. So we are Thomas Jefferson's cousins. We descend from his grandma. We descend from his first cousin. And then they switched seats, right? Exactly. This is when I was like, And now she's right up in my face in a way that I've only experienced people above 80 and under 8. She's like right up in my face, looking at every corner of my face, and she's like, come here, baby, give me a kiss. I always knew I had black family. And I was like, okay, well, this is much better than the alternative. She totally slapped me. My, slightly buzzed self over here being a little too candid at the dinner table. Well, she starts calling me cousin, and much later, Henry Louis Gates Jr. would affirm that we descend from Thomas Jefferson's first cousin. We're actually fairly close cousins. Hurricane Katrina happened, 20 years ago this fall. And first call I got was from Dave Chappelle. Dave's my god brother, fathers are best friends, dad's my godfather. And he's like, I said, bro, I just got back from the mosque. I was like, yeah? He's like, Imam said, don't worry about Red Cross, corporate America, government take care of them. But should any individual ask for alms, do not deny them. Not anybody's been impacted from Katrina. He's like, real talk, I live in a cornfield in southwest Ohio. I think if any Katrina evacuee finds me, they'll be all set. But you're out there in the world. If anybody you come across, let me know. So the next day I get a call. Very genteel southern accent. Could only be my grandmother or my cousin. And she says, Cousin Ben. And I said, oh, Cousin Maggie, what can I do you for? Hurricane Katrina, Cousin Ben. I said, yes, Cousin Ben. She said, you run a foundation, don't you? I said, we fund civil rights in California. And she said, well, just listen to me. I said, okay. two boys, lower ninth ward. One of them in an iron lung, the other one in sugar. Family has a home business because the parents take care of those boys all day. Floodwaters came, destroyed everything. Family's now in Baton Rouge. Wind and rain, no flood, but there's mold in the hallways, and that mold gets in those boys' lungs, and they'll both die. But there's a developer in Sacramento who's built a community on spec, and if we could just get the boys from Baton Rouge to Sacramento, they could have a free house for a year, and their family could rebuild. He said, what do you need? He said, I need $30,000 for an air ambulance to get the boys out of Baton Rouge. I said, I think I know somebody who will write the check. So I called Dave, accountant, who wrote the check. A few weeks go by. This is right after he'd come back from South Africa and getting ready to relaunch his career. And I'm not a lawyer, but the closest thing to the family, so I'm always pulled into the crises. And he's like, FedEx is at the door. And I was like, okay. And he comes back. He's like, it's from Sacramento. I was like, oh, I got FedEx from Sacramento on my desk. He's like, I think it's the family. I said, oh, yeah. Well, let's open it up. And you get that very distinctive rick of a tab and a FedEx envelope. And then you hear each of us slide out 8 by 10 photographs. And then Dave gets like, stops breathing. Ben, yeah, Dave? Did you know they were white? I said, Dave, she said lower ninth ward. Are there any white people in lower ninth ward? And I was like, he said, apparently so. He felt, God bless you, the Goldman family. Ben, did you know they were Jewish? I said, Dave, I didn't know they were white. Then why would I thought they were Jewish? He said, right. He said, do me a favor, bro. So I said, you like telling stories? I said, I do. He said, don't tell us one for me. I said, why not? He said, because I have no earthly idea how to explain this at the mosque this way. So one family, this is the family, huh? I said, Dave, I said, should anybody ask a question at the mosque, you tell them this is how only America can work. And why should it be strange that the slave holding side of the family, called the side of the family that had held slaves to the very last day, to get homes for some poor white Jews to get the heck from a black Muslim, to get the heck out of the lower ninth ward. So that's how America should work. And I told that story once. And so Maggie Bland set me on a path, and she had her own story about how she'd been raised by a black relative who she called Mammy, the way you would say mom. It was jarred me because I'd never heard that in that way. And yet, she'd been looking for her black family since she was 12, and she was now 82. And what it allowed me to begin to see was that my enslaved black family weren't just related to their owners, but they were all connected in ways that just human beings can't but help connect to each other, even in something as evil as slavery. I would find my grandmother's great-grandfather in the owner's will. Frederick Bland was in the will of Richard Yates Bland. And every line protected him. And I said to Henry Louis Gates Jr., what the hell am I looking at? And he said, well, apparently Richard Yates Bland lacked courage, but he also feared allowing his sons to torture his brother. He said, what you're looking at is an owner who's dying and realizes that his slave is his 6-year-older brother and is trying to protect him, but doesn't have the courage to free him. And you're just like, oh. But the beautiful thing now is that we're far enough away from slavery that young people in Virginia are really just curious to know the other side of the family. You know, it's been 4 or 5 generations. They don't necessarily grow up with the pain that I inherited from my grandmother, who inherited pain from her grandmothers that were slaves. And that gives me hope, because all that we've ever been trying to do since race was created in America in the early 1700s is honestly get back to a place where people of African descent, people of European descent, people who are all the above, recognize each other's humanity. Don't trip on the color of skin or the texture of hair. Realize it is literally as meaningless when it comes to characters' intelligence as hair color or eye color or anything else. And so yeah, I believe that racial healing is possible, but it is a courageous and tough path for all of us. When I found out that Robert Ely was my cousin, so a whole week of my life in a bottle of whiskey, I'll never forget.
Okay. From what seems to be a large portion of your life, you've been standing at the crossroads of leadership and activism. How would you say you wrestle with the tension between being radical enough to push the systems and strategic enough to change God's
You know, what I'd say is this. You gotta learn from everybody who has something to teach you. There's a moment in a Waffle House in like 1994, I want to say, 1993. Stacy and I were trying to stop the governor of Mississippi from turning a black college into a prison, making Mississippi Valley State University, Jerry Rice's alma mater, a prison. They're going to take Steve McNair, the great black quarterback, and make his alma mater, which is also Medgar Evers and Murray Evers' alma mater, Alcorn State, just shut it down. Take Jackson State, which is Walter Payton's alma mater, and make it majority white within 2 years. With no compensatory increase in spaces for black students at the historically white schools. Of course, Mississippi only has historically white schools and historically black schools. And we were up against a governor who was like the prototype for Trump. A businessman, highly litigious, openly racist, member of the White Citizens Council, which became the Conservative Citizens Council. And we were getting a lot of death threats. And just that day, when the organizers I was sitting with at 2 o'clock in the morning had been threatened with lynching in Starksville, Mississippi, which is not a nice town. If you're a Johnny Cash fan, there's a song called Starksville City Jail. He got thrown in jail there for picking a daisy. And that deputy went on to become sheriff, and was still sheriff when this was all happening. And to get there, you've got to drive past Philadelphia, Mississippi, where a black journalist who was a traitor turned over Cheney Goodman Shorter to the sheriff and turned him over to the Clay and had them lynched. And then the sheriff was the head of the Shriners at the time. So it's still a pretty dangerous place. And so we're there sorting out, like, how do we thread this needle? And we're told that all the media in Mississippi is either black, a small amount, or was segregationist media into the 1980s, and we're there in the early 90s, so it was like segregation till last Tuesday. And we can't trust them. And we're told all these places we can't go and we can't talk to because it's not safe. And it's going on 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's an old white guy staring at us from the counter. He has feathered hair, he has gold rings on 8 fingers. He has a white shirt hanging down to here, which becomes a fixation in a few months. And he's carrying 2 large to-go bags over to talk to us. What comes across him? And he says, "Are you the boys I've been seeing on television?" Now, I'm from California, and one of the other guys was from St. Louis, and another one was from New Orleans, and the fourth one was from Chicago. And none of us were accustomed to be called boy and answering to it, let alone by a white guy in Mississippi. But it's 3 o'clock in the morning, we've been threatened. I get threatened every night around 1 a.m. by the Klan. They've been threatened with lynching to the face. There's no other black people in the restaurant, so we give the only logical response to threading the needle. "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, hold on a second." And Waffle House is there for human obesity, and the to-go cards, the go bags are grocery sacks, and he's going to turn them around and put them down. And the fellas are pretty sure he's about to shoot us. Back then, for $150 and no felonies, you could carry a concealed weapon anywhere in Mississippi you wanted to. And he's wearing one of those Cuban kind of formal white sort of dress Hawaiian shirts. And the fellas said, "Does he have a gun under him?" And I was just like, "Chill out, some suits say," and they're like, look at me like, "No, just let us we're on the football team, let us take care of him." And I was like, I had the last bit of positional power in my head on the table. I said, "Fellas, let's hear what the man has to say. At least I I feel like maybe he's on alert that we're watching. And they give me this look, like, if he shoots us and he doesn't shoot you, our mothers are coming for him. Finish the job. And so we're all watching the slow motion. He turns around because we can't see his dominant hand. He turns around and goes, I just want to shake your hand, boys. He calls boy twice now. If I'd been born an N-word in this crazy state, I'd be mad as hell too. Y'all stopped fighting back 25 years ago. He was talking about when King was assassinated. I have no earthly idea why. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of the march you're planning. If you need anything for it, if you need money, if you need a car, if you need somebody else to march with you, you come find me. I own the used car lot right down Highway 49, explain the 8 gold rings. And we changed our whole organizing style the next day, and it's what I've used my entire life since, which is you give everybody a chance to disappoint you. General Colin Powell said to me when I was a very young man, what is easy in a democracy is to figure out what you disagree with somebody about. What is harder and much more urgent is to find the one thing you can agree on and go get that done. How does that play out? When I was president of NAACP nationally, we could not get California to save our life to shrink its prison system. But the 4th largest one was in Georgia, which is far from the 4th largest state. And Stacey Abrams and I would get Georgia to pass the most sweeping state-level criminal justice reform legislation to shrink a penal system in the history of the country because we both learned from that incident in that campaign. She, as the minority leader, listened to Nathan Deal, the Tea Party governor of Georgia, till they could find one thing they could agree on. And he's a fiscal conservative with a son who's a drug court judge. And the one thing that they could agree on was that the penal system was too big in Georgia. And years earlier, I figured out that Newt Gingrich and I both believe in the right to redemption when we campaigned to keep an evangelical woman in Texas from being executed. And in that, I learned that Newt's his identity is a class identity of a group of white people that have been over-incarcerated in Georgia since that state was founded, like Australia, as a penal colony. So I thought he might be willing to support me on this. I got a 2-page letter of endorsement for the NAACP criminal justice reform agenda, full-throated from Newt Gingrich. I guarantee you it is the most read letter in the history of the Georgia legislature. Every Democrat read it, every Republican read it, because when the NAACP shows up with a criminal justice plan, and there's a 2-page letter of endorsement from Newt Gingrich, you may not read our plan, but you sure as heck will read his letter. And that's how it passed. And so the hardest thing as an organizer is to work with people who are like, you've offended me, we disagree on everything, please stop talking about anything else other than what we're talking about, getting done together, just time. And yet be able to value them and respect them for having the courage to show up. Because he didn't owe me any favors. He got nothing from endorsing the NAACP agenda, except for being able to sleep easier at the side of his family that still is fodder for the prison system in Georgia might be more safer in the future.
Why did you trace it all the way back to you?
Yeah, well, so I grew up in these whole families where people, like the black side, they talked about the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement all the time. And on the white side, they talked about the American Revolution like it was last week. I was born in 73, and the bicentennial was 76. This is what happens next year, it's the 250th anniversary. And my dad's from New England, and it was actually the first protest of my life. I was into it because there were all these books, and they had like my dad's ancestors in them. He descended from the youngest combatant in the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The Willard painting, A.M. Willard, the Spirit of 76 painting was painted by one of his cousins, and the guy with the bloody bandage was one of his cousins who posed for it. And so it was really cool because they had these books in the Robert Down library where I did first and third grade and skipped second. And they had my dad's family in them, so I really wanted to see books with my mom's family in them. And all they had on black people was Harriet Tubman and George Washington Carver. And so I went to the librarian, who now tells the story because she would go on to be a celebrated expert in diverse children's literature because she was so embarrassed that she could not answer my questions. She tells the story over and over. And I just said, I read all the books on my dad's family. Where can I find books on my mom's family? And she said, well, we have a book on Harriet Tubman, and we have a book on George Washington Carver. And I said, I read about the trade lady, I read about the peanut butter guy. What else you got? And she was like, yeah, nothing. Now the crazy thing again is when you dig into it, you get into the DNA, because white family history is something, man. You can end up like in Roman times pretty quick on Ancestry.com. Bottom of one and a long night, you're there. On the black side, you run into all the records problems of slavery, right? So you might get back to the 1850 census, you rarely get back beyond that. And so then you got to get into DNA. So again, our DNA, Thomas Jefferson's grandma, that makes sense because we actually know the plans. Our DNA, we sent from a guy named William Randolph. William Randolph, they called that Adam of Virginia. So I got curious about Randolph because I was at the college formerly known as Christian Broadcasting Network University, Regent University in Norfolk, Virginia. And I was talking on stage, and I said, well, I've been doing my DNA. Apparently I descended from the Adam of Virginia, William Randolph. And Pat Robertson's son walks up to me afterwards. Dad, of course, founded the school, and he says, you said on stage you descend from William Randolph. I said, hey, cousin. He said, yeah, that's what I was thinking. And then I found out that those two family trees are also the family trees of three of the four first American presidents. My mom is cousins to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Zachary Taylor, George Patton, General Lee, and Langston Hughes, all to that family tree. And I was like, shit, they had books in my mom's family. How come they didn't know? But again, it really speaks to the beauty of those families. What they remind you is that the world is much smaller than you think. America is much smaller than you think. We are all cousins. The only question is it 500 years back, or 5,000 years back, or 50,000 years back? And again, it teaches you to be humble. Writing my book, the title was a mystery. And Henry Louis Gates Jr. helped me find out this thing that was incomprehensible to me, that the black women in the family, deep into slavery, would always say, never forget our people, we're always free. And Henry Louis Gates Jr. said, well, that would only make sense once in the black family, because it's coming down one line. I said, what's that? It's the first person to show up. Let's figure out who they were. My maternal line, my black maternal line, starts with an Afro-Polynesian woman from Madagascar who arrives on one of 17 slave ships to ever come to the United States from Madagascar. 16 out of 17 slave ships are piloted by no European pilots. The historians agree that slave trade, which is irregular in every way, was the artifact of a pirate war between East African pirates and European pirates. And Henry Louis Gates Jr. says to me, well, what the hell else would a pirate woman say to their children born into slavery? But never forget our people were always free. And I said, yeah, but how can they possibly remember what she said if they couldn't remember her? And he said, Ben, things like remembering ancestors and places of origin, that takes multiple conversations repeated over a child's lifetime. But a phrase you can pass on, even in the commerce of slavery, simply because of the way it makes you feel, you'll never forget. Crying all day, crying, listening to these kids talk about stuff they done in New York. Came with my grandma and Aunt Kyle. Oh, this is why Mike is supposed to be here. Colin Huffman was a beautiful soul. He was a poet, he was a historian. He taught both at the Naval Academy. The students there would talk about how Kylan taught them. If you ever saw the movie The 300, the shield and sword tricks of the Roman army to domination. As a history professor, as a poetry professor, you teach them haiku. If you want to really understand Kylan Huffman, just put in Kylan Huffman haiku, and it will come up. It was published in many places. But I think the best understanding of who Kylan Huffman became was actually from his father and his roommate speaking at his funeral. And so I knew Kylan as a high school student, and we had just reconnected. I was at Amnesty International, and he was working as a military intelligence contractor. And then when the war happened, he saw that he was in the U.S. Marine Corps, that Marine Corps grunts were making their situation much more dangerous and the likelihood of success much less possible, because they were doing things like urinating on Qurans in mosques. And so he was rushing over to the front to do cultural sensitivity training for the Marine Corps, trying to turn the situation around, when his official report is that his Humvee broke down near a market, and he had the officer's uniform, and a man apparently thought he'd get away with one shot, and he ran up to the group with a pistol in his pocket and blew out Huffman's brains, as he was trying to figure out how the team figured out how to fix the Humvee. And his roommate got up and he said, you know, the Naval Academy, we're supposed to have a different roommate every year, but Kylan and I were together for 4 years. Because at the Naval Academy, your roommates are based on having a common musical taste. And apparently we were the only 2 men at the Naval Academy in our year who both liked Erasure and Depeche Mode. And I'm going to tell you, it's the same way it was said in the Naval Chapel with all the words. And he said, so we were together every year because we liked Erasure and Depeche Mode and nobody else did. And eventually we were the seniors, we were in charge of a whole floor of first years, and we were blaring our Erasure and our Depeche Mode. No longer did we have to keep it quiet. We were in charge of the floor. They were going to listen to our music too. And a young man from the South showed up at our doorway wanting to speak with Kylan, and he waited patiently with his face twisted up. And Kylan looked at him and he said, do you like Erasure too? And the young man, and this is the exact words, said, no sir, I do not like commie, faggot, pinko music, sir. And Kylan said, oh, well then come here. And he put him in a headlock. And he made him listen to the entire album. In that headlock, Kylan was a black belt before he got to York. And he said, young man at ease, released from that block. At ease, young man, he said, do you know why I made you listen to the entire CD? And he said, no, sir, I have no idea where you would force me, sir, to listen to. And he says, because young man, you were here to learn how to lead. And what the leader loves matters less. What matters more is that you can appreciate the cultures of the people that you lead. And you may not appreciate it, but I guarantee you somebody that you lead will. That is your lesson for today. You are dismissed. And the young man said, but Isaac, you are dismissed. But his father did something. Kylan's dad was special forces from Vietnam. Kylan's dad would be told to be in Germany in the winter. He'd come back with a leather tan. We're like, bro, it's not Germany. We know that. Don't know where he was. Wasn't Germany in the winter. And he was a man of few words. And he was a man at that point who was entering the Tea Party. And he had tremendous dignity. He walked into that Naval Academy pulpit in his dress paratrooper with his beret from the tongue, and only the Green Berets wore them. And he pulled out his half glasses, looking like an aging Rambo, and put them on. And he read Kylan's last letter to him. And in that letter, Kylan talked about being a citizen of democracy. He talked about being a sailor or soldier or a Marine in a volunteer military. He talked about the responsibility that citizens of a democracy have for the actions of their government. And he said that he was not certain that citizens of a dictatorship bore the same responsibility. He said a lot of courageous things in that letter. And then he talked about why he was heading over. And then his father, having read his last letter, put his half glasses back in his uniform, and he looked at the assembled brass from the Pentagon in the front row. They were all there because he's either the first or second Academy grad killed. They all showed up. And he said, now it's the responsibility of the women and the men gathered in the first few rows of this chapel to make sure that my son did not die in vain. Kylan married his high school sweetheart, a woman that we all went to school with here, named Heidi. And we were really excited about reuniting him and military and telling me at Amnesty. He was tremendously courageous. He was a poet. He was a historian. He served his country, and he gave his life trying to make sure that the people of Iraq would not be disrespected by our military. That was Kylan.
Thank you to our panelists and Mr. Jealous for such an inspiring conversation. And thank you all for being here tonight to support our Black Student Union. On that note, Benita, get over here. Mr. Jealous.
I think eighth graders are way more impressive than when I was
would like to present the BSU's first graduating senior with a special gift.
So here, Mayor. So do you know where you're going to college at? So where are you going? You're going to UC Long Beach. You're going to CS I'm sure that you're smart to go to a really cool place for college. I just want to say, I am so proud of you. I'm so proud of the courage that you showed. I'm so proud of you backing up your friends and everybody all together 3 years to make sure there's a Black Student Union. And being a student activist, it improves your critical thinking, it improves your critical speaking, and as social science suggests, it actually increases your odds of success in life. So we know that you're well prepared to succeed, and you will succeed, and I very much look forward to seeing you back here as a fellow graduate of York, bragging about all the great things that you do in your life. And this is a gift from the BSU and all of us to say congratulations and thank you.
Let's continue to build on tonight's conversation, both here at York and beyond, by staying curious, thinking critically, and working together to make a positive difference. Have a wonderful evening and safe travels.